church. Welcome to Compassion Sunday. It's great to be gathered together in the room and also online. I want to start off this morning by just honouring Rodney and thanking him for the work that he does. Incredible work for so long now, and whenever we have connection with Rodney, it's an absolute pleasure, and never forces himself upon us, and he's just, how can I serve you? And want to honour you, mate, so thank you. I also want to thank you, church. Your generosity is out of this world. It's amazing. Thank you so much for the way that you just, your regular tithes and what you give to the church, fantastic. But you always go over and above with your offerings. And many of those offerings, love offerings, go towards our compassion children, many other not-for-profits, our Beyond family. So thank you so much for your generosity, and it's so encouraging. Today, as you can see, Grace and I are up here, and Grace is our youth minister. She's also one of our compassion advocates, does a great job of that. And we're planning just to do something a little bit different this morning. We're going to have a conversation, and you're quite welcome to listen if you want. And hopefully as we chat and as we share our hearts about compassion and the work of compassion, that it will inspire you to keep being interested in compassion and also sponsoring and sowing into this great work. So thanks, Grace, for being up here with me and agreeing to do this. We're going to just ask each other a couple of questions. So the first question is, I know you absolutely love compassion. You wouldn't be an advocate if you didn't. But tell me, can you just describe your compassion journey?
Yes. Well, I think my compassion journey started a very, very long time ago. When I was about 6 or 7, my family sponsored our first compassion child. And he was from El Salvador. And I remember going to school and I would say to my friends that I had a new baby brother. And they would be like, what? Your mum hasn't had a child? And I would be like, no, we have a compassion-sponsored child and he's my brother. And I think that sort of heart has continued, I suppose, over the years, in that I suppose at a young age I considered our sponsored child to be a part of our family. And so now I think about it and I think, in God's family, we're all brothers and sisters. And so I can see the way that first experience of compassion is sort of threaded through my journey. And when I turned 18, I got my first compassion child for myself. So I sponsored Enoch, who is from Rwanda, and he is now about 20 and is actually at college. So it's pretty cool that I get to still sponsor him and write letters, and we get to see where he's at still over those years. And then when we launched our new compassion region here at Live Streams a couple of years ago in Sumba, I sponsored my second child, and her name is Selen. She's the cutest little girl. She loves dancing, and I love writing letters to her. And I also get to hear about her family, and her mum will write letters as well, and just see the impact that has had. I think that changes your whole perspective on what it means to be a compassion sponsor when you have that personal relationship, I think. And then for me, I had the privilege of, in 2019, we went on a trip to Bali in Indonesia, and we visited the Compassion Project there, and that just changed a lot of stuff for us. And I think that's how we came back and we became compassion advocates. And just to see on the ground what compassion is doing is just incredible. Yep. And it's such a privilege to be able to be a part of that.
Yeah. So true. It's good. Awesome.
So, Rod, what about your compassion journey? You've probably got a little bit more than I do over your years.
So, yeah, our So our compassion journey's over 26 years now. So Leanne's
older than I.
Yeah. Leanne's been married to me for 26 years. That deserves a hand. And so our compassion journey started when we first got married, and we decided, I'd gone on a mission trip to the Philippines in the 90s. Yeah, 90s were good.
I was born then.
Yeah, well, you weren't born. And just fell in love with the country, and it just made sense that we would sponsor a child from the Philippines, because I thought maybe I'll go back there and maybe be able to visit that young person at some stage, which is actually on my bucket list. To eventually do that would be wonderful, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But we sponsored a young fella by the name of Jamil Jr. And I actually thought about him during the week, and I stalked him on Facebook. And I'd actually missed a post from him back in, it was 10 years ago, 2013. And on that post, he was just like, are you Mr. Rod Tom, and did you and Leanne sponsor me? And I just want to say, I just thank you so much for investing in my education. And I can't believe I missed it. So I ended up writing back to him and also reaching out to him. And I haven't had a conversation with him yet, but I just thought, it's beautiful. So I stalked his Facebook profile, and he is actually a PhD student studying in a university in America at the moment, which is it's just amazing to think that Leanne and I had just a small part. We've played a small part in this young man's journey, and it's fantastic. We currently have 2 children, so I think their pictures are going to come up. We've got Mercy and we've got Nisha. Mercy is 9 years old, and she lives with her mum and dad in Kenya. And we chose Mercy because we've got Beyond partners in Kenya, and I thought, again, maybe that's an opportunity one day that I might be able to meet Mercy. And she, in her letters, she loves playing hide and seek. She loves going to church. And in her latest letter, she says that she appreciates our support and love. And then there's a big section there where she says, "And I love you." And it's just like, when you see those videos, you just always get tears. Nisha's 16 years old, so she's coming to the end of her compassion journey. She lives in Thailand. She was a part of our old project. Again, Thailand, go to Thailand. I thought I might be able to get there. She loves reading, and she also loves going to church. And both of our girls said that they love going to church. And forever we've been praying for our children, and including our biological children, that they'd grow up loving the church, and they'd grow up loving Jesus, or they'd grow up loving Jesus and they'd grow up loving his church. That's always been our prayer. And to have our 2 girls say that is just a real thrill. Now, my other journey was back in 2015. I had the privilege of going with some pastors on a trip to Haiti. And if you've been around for so long, you might remember me coming back and standing before you an absolute mess. And I went with these incredible pastors, and all of the Haitians that are standing there with us are ex-compassion people who are now working in the projects, or many of them are students and leaders in their nation, which was we had lunch with them. It was fantastic. But I was exposed to extreme poverty. 2 things that I want to say about the trip. We visited a place called Canaan. So Canaan was this rocky outcrop on the scarp on the outside of the township. And it was a settlement that formed as a result of the devastating earthquakes that happened in 2010. And we went in 2015, and I couldn't believe how much of the devastation was still in the streets and the buildings. And I was like, this is 5 years ago. We would have cleaned, you know what I mean? Like, that would have been cleaned up a long time ago, but they just don't have the means. And anyway, all of these people exited the city to go to this Canaan, which was just like dry, hot, no green whatsoever. And they went there because they feared the earthquakes happening again. And so this settlement formed, and we got to go visit a family of somebody who was in the compassion, was a compassion family. And essentially their house was just a box. It was literally a crate. And it just, it broke my heart. But it also, to hear the family talk about how this is our home and you're welcome in our home and we're so blessed to have what we have, just again wrecked me even more. And the other thing that really impacted me was that in the midst of so much tragedy and poverty, there was also a ton of hope. One of the things that impacted me the most was the power of partnership. You know, we are just so much better together. So much better together. Compassion provides for me a vehicle for us, for my local church, to partner with a local church in the developing world to reach their local community by mobilizing devoted followers of Jesus who are willing to serve him and serve children, and together in Jesus' name, we, and that's in capital letters, caps lock, we together can give children a future and a hope. And when I went to Haiti and I saw it with my own eyes, it works, church. It works. Our partnership with this fantastic organisation works. So, church, I want to say that you can be confident. You can be confident that the money that you give to Compassion, that $48 or even more that you give every single month, is an incredible kingdom investment. And you can be confident that it's being administered with integrity, and it's having a massive impact not only on the child that you sponsor, but also their family and their broader family and the local community. And as I saw in Haiti, standing with these amazing young people, it's also transforming a nation. So I saw it with my own eyes, and I want you to get that. Be confident in what your small investment can do. So that's my journey with Compassion.
Love it. Thanks, Rod.
So, Grace, why is the ministry of Compassion so important to you?
I think, as I said earlier, just seeing it firsthand changes your whole perspective. And I think from the first time that I ever went to a developing nation, it just, it changed my heart. I think to be able to step outside of your current circumstances and see what it might be like to live in poverty, and to, like, we just have no idea here in Australia what that means. And I feel really sad that there's a generation of young people that haven't been able to see that yet. But I do pray that, you know, in the coming years that's an opportunity for young people to be able to step in and see that and see the impact that it has. But I think one of the things that impacted me the most when I went and was on the field is that you see the joy in the eyes and the hearts of these children. And it's a joy that does not come from their material items, and it doesn't come from what they have. It comes from within, and it comes from Jesus in their lives. But it also comes from understanding that happiness and joy, it doesn't come from your circumstances. It's so much deeper than that. And I think that changes everything to understand that. And I think here in Australia can lose a little bit of that sometimes. And we don't... maybe we sort of get a little bit bogged down and sad about our own circumstances, but if we can look outside and see the joy that people can have even in their brokenness and even in the difficult stuff, I think it really changes things. And I guess when you look at what Compassion does and the ministry of Compassion, as Rodney shared, it's church-based, child-focused and Christ-centred. And I think that just changes the way that we help people in other countries. We can give money towards projects, you know, to rebuild a house or whatever it is, but Compassion works in spreading the gospel and giving people hope in Jesus. And I think that's the biggest gift that we could ever give, is to be able to share the gospel and to share Jesus' love with people. But not only do they do that, as in they actively share the gospel through their words, but they do that in action too. And I think meeting the physical needs of a child, it just changes everything. To break the cycle of poverty, that gives a child hope. And to provide an education, that just changes the entire, the next generation can be raised up to be able to work and have a job, and it just changes everything for them. So I think that, being able to see the way that Compassion works, not only to address physical needs, but also to address the spiritual needs of a child, that just is incredible, and I love that. And I guess when I look at Compassion, I just see that the heart behind what they do is so much of what Jesus' heart is. And when I read the Gospels and I read what Jesus said, it echoes so much with what Compassion does. But not only like what Jesus said, but we look at the Old Testament and we can see that this is what we're called to do. We look at what Jesus said, we look at what Paul said, we look at what John said. Like, they all tell us to take a step for the poor and the marginalised. And I think that Compassion does that so well, and it's such a great opportunity to be able to partner with them to see as they do that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's good. Rod, what have you learnt about poverty over the years?
Good question, Grace. A couple of things. First thing that I wanted to say, you mentioned education there. We have, as most of you know, we've got 3 biological sons, and we chose Mercy and Nisha because they were girls. And so we're praying and hoping that we'll have daughters-in-laws one day. But we wanted to welcome them into our family. And one of the other reasons is because I'm convinced that if we can help women in the developing world get educated, things will change. I'm absolutely convinced of that. And I know that because I can see the opposite of what's happening, and the enemy of our souls is hell-bent on trying to traffic them, abuse them, and not allow them to be educated. And so that is one of the reasons why we chose 3 girls to sponsor. But I've learned a lot about poverty, especially on my trip to Haiti. Today we're going to sing a song at the end with the lyrics that says, and we often sing it, "Break my heart with what breaks yours." And I don't just sing that flippantly. If you're singing that from your heart, I really believe God will answer that prayer. He's certainly answered that prayer in our lives. One of the things that hit me when I was in Haiti was when I was listening to the stories, talking to family members, I often heard this sentence: "I was born into poverty." Now you might think, "Well, what are you talking about there?" Well, let me just unpack that a bit. I think we tend to forget, and I think that we tend to not think about the fact that we don't have any control over where we are born. We have essentially been born into prosperity. We have won the cosmic lottery. And when you sit down with someone who's living in poverty and you hear them say, "I was born into poverty," it hits home. The reality is the majority of Haitians are born into poverty. It's a very, very complex issue, and I'm not here to minimize it at all. But the reality is it won't be fixed by people in the Western world telling them to get a job, because there ain't none. Poverty affects, the other thing that really impacted me is it affects everything. It affects mental health. It affects families. I met a little man who we visited a project, and he was just following me around all the time. We get back in the bus, and I turn into the window, and there he is looking at me, and I open the window, and it affects families because this little man said to me, "Will you be my dad?" And many Haitians are fatherless. So it affects families. It affects infrastructure. Homes and buildings are not built to spec, and they just crumple in an earthquake and have devastating consequences. The environment, I was blown away by the fact that in the town area, I didn't see any trees. And I asked one of the locals, "Why is there no trees? There's no bird life, there's no wildlife, what's the deal?" And they said, "Well, we have to cut the trees down so that we can make coal, and then we sit on the side of the road and we sell that coal as a way of being able to make some money for our family." It affects the spirituality. I asked a couple of people, "What do you pray for?" I mean, God just whacked me with this. They said, "We literally pray for food, a roof over our head, and we pray for His protection." And I just remember going, wow, what do we pray for? Have you done an audit on what you've prayed for this last week? We heard so many stories of how desperate they are, and one of the most devastating things that I heard was they mix a little bit of mud and they make these things called mud cakes, and that's what they eat. And that's true. You might find that hard to believe, but that's what happens in Haiti. So mental health, families, infrastructure, environment, spirituality. And the last thing that I've learned about poverty is that, and I saw it, Jesus is right there. Jesus is right there in the midst of their poverty. And I saw him. I saw Jesus in the children. There was a massive difference between a compassion child and a child that didn't have sponsorship. I mean, we just saw that, didn't we? I saw Jesus in their parents. I saw Jesus in their homes. I saw Jesus in the compassion field workers, their tutors, their administrators, many whom were previous children sponsored by compassion. I saw Jesus in the local churches trying to be the hands and feet, his hands and feet. Jesus was there. It was tough, but I also saw a lot of hope through Jesus, and that's what I learned about poverty on that trip.
Thanks, Rod, for sharing that with us. We've been talking a little bit long enough now. We would like to ask you a question, to just have a little chat with the person you're sitting next to, or if you're streaming online with your family at home, or you can type in the chat. We would love for you to just have a quick chat about where have you seen poverty in your life? Yeah. So please feel free to chat amongst yourselves.
You're good? Good.
I hope you've been able to have a quick chat with the person next to you about where you've seen poverty. But we just love you to reflect on that, because if you think about how each person in this room has had their own experience of what poverty means, that's so many different situations and opportunities that you can be praying for. And so just encourage you as you head into your weeks to not just forget about your own understanding of poverty, but sit in that space and just pray into those situations that come to your mind and come to your heart. Yep. Rod, my next question for you is, what do you believe is God's heart for the poor and the marginalised?
Okay, if you don't hear anything else, just hear this. God has a massive heart for the poor and the marginalised. God's word is full of his love for people living in poverty and people living on the margins. He also has a lot, and this is where it challenges me, he has a lot to say about our responsibility to help. So I just want to give you a few verses. I'm not going to take a heap of time here. But it's going to come up on the screen. Psalm 146, verse 7. And this will give you a glimpse of his heart. He upholds the cause of the oppressed and gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets prisoners free. The Lord gives sight to the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the foreigner and sustains the fatherless and the widow, but he frustrates the way of the wicked. He speaks, church, God speaks on their behalf because of his overwhelming love and compassion for what is right. And he encourages and he invites us, those who have means. We have means. We were born into prosperity. We have won the cosmic lottery. And he has a lot to say to us. He invites us who have means to be his hand and to be his feet, to show love and compassion and to be generous to those who have not. Proverbs 14 verse 31 says, "You insult your maker when you exploit the powerless. When you're kind to the poor, you honour God." I don't think I need to say much more than that. Grace, I wonder what God's been saying to you in the lead up to today.
He's been saying a lot to me, actually, Rod, but I'll only give you a glimpse into that. I actually just wanted to say, Tam, when she shared earlier during worship, she was sharing about being in a place of repentance and a place of going back to God. And I think what God has been saying to me is a lot about where your heart posture is at. So we can often tick off a list of things to do, like sponsor a child or give, read our Bible, pray, whatever it is. But I just think being in a place with God, in intimate relationship with God and knowing Him, it has to be our first priority, and it has to be where everything else flows from. And I just have been reminded a lot of that lately. And at youth, we've actually been reading through the Sermon on the Mount. And hopefully you've read the Sermon on the Mount before if you're following Jesus, or if you haven't, I really encourage you to read through that and understand God's heart, because it's so much more than just teachings. It's saying, hey, I'm actually going to flip the whole kingdom upside down and tell you that this is not just ticking a bunch of things off your list of things you should do. It's about changing your heart posture. And I think so often we can just go back to that place of holding on to everything so tightly, and this is mine, and just sort of being a little bit guarded with our generosity. And I just am reminded to have just open hearts and open palms to what God's calling you to, and remember that what we have isn't really our own, and it's actually God's. And are we willing to say, to be generous from a place of, this is not mine. It's so much more than me holding on to my possessions or my money or my time, but actually being like, hey, this is God's and I'm going to give it to Him. And I'm reminded a little bit of this when it says in Matthew 6, it talks about giving to the needy, and it says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honoured by others. Truly I tell you that they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so your giving may be done in secret, and then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. When I read this, there is so much stuff that comes out of it. But just one of the things that I was reminded of is the idea that our left hand doesn't know what our right hand is doing. It could be that we're so in intimate relationship with God, and we know God so much that our generosity and our giving doesn't come from a place of I'm making a decision to give. It's like that. It's almost secret from yourself, that you are so ingrained and you're so in tune with what God's doing that of course you're going to give, that your left hand doesn't know what your right hand is doing. And I just think, can we be in a place where we are in intimate relationship with God, and then the outflowings of our faith, it comes across, and we see the benefits of that, instead of thinking that I am required to give a certain amount or to sponsor a child or whatever it might be that you think is the law and what you need to do, but rather shift your heart to be like, I know God and I know His heart and I know what Jesus is saying in this passage, and I'm going to go to my Father first, and then from that place the outflowings of that come across. And I think generosity is an outflowing. We have a generous heart when we're spending time with God, but I also think it is an obedience act, and sometimes we're not in that place because we're not always in intimate relationship with God, and we do go through ebbs and flows. And I think there is also a level of obedience. We are told so many times that we need to advocate for the poor and the marginalised and to give to the needy, and so I do think that it is from that place where your heart is so important, and Jesus is highlighting that. But it's also about taking that step of obedience, saying, hey, if I follow Jesus, I'm willing to give, and I'm willing to go over and above because I choose to follow Him. So I think that's a little glimpse into my heart and some of the things God's been saying to me. There's plenty of other things, but that's just a glimpse.
How good was that? Real good. Yeah. So, Grace, God's heart. We had a little bit of a glimpse of God's heart. We read the Word. God's heart to our heart, and then just that natural outflow of His Spirit and love and generosity. What do you believe God's calling us to?
Well, we have 4 S's that God is calling us to today that we're going to bring to you. And our first one is to sponsor. So obviously it's Compassion Sunday, and we want to encourage you to pray and consider sponsoring a child. It can make such a difference in someone's life, and it is $48 a month to change someone's life and for someone to know the gospel and know Jesus, but also to have their practically have their life changed completely. So I encourage you to come see us in the foyer. There's a table out there with different children that you can have a look and see if you'd like to sponsor a child today. So please come chat to me or Sydney after the service, because we'd love to talk to you more about it, or Rodney as well.
That's great. First S, sponsor. Second S is support. One of the things that I think that we can do to help alleviate poverty is to support and partner with organisations like Compassion, missionaries, Indigenous workers in the developing world. And I just want to encourage you to keep praying for our Beyond family, keep prayerfully considering them, keep prayerfully considering what at the beginning of this year, we all pledged over $200,000 towards our family, our Beyond family. And I just wanted to remind you of that this morning, because I believe that one of the best ways that we can help alleviate poverty and also see the gospel spread around the world is to partner with fantastic organisations like Compassion, but also to remember our Beyond family. So that's the second S, is support.
So the third S is scribe. So we want to focus today on a bit of letter writing. We've got an opportunity for you to do that after the service. Sometimes it can be really difficult. We often forget to write a letter, or other priorities come into play. But today is just an opportunity to set aside a bit of time and write a letter. So we've got paper letter writing stuff out in the foyer if that's the way that you'd like to write a letter. But if you have an online account, we encourage you to just log in after the service, write a letter. And we also have a photo booth. You can take a photo with yourself and your sponsor child's profile and send that through to your sponsor child. I know it makes a huge difference. On Friday, we got a letter from one of our youth Compassion children, Cantopong, and he said in his letter, he just said, "I am so glad to write to you and to hear from you." And I just think that is the heart behind it. And I was reading that and I was like, I am so glad to hear from you too. And it changes your whole perspective to have a personal relationship with a child. So really encourage you to take that opportunity and try not to let it become a lesser priority, but put that effort into building the relationship that you can have with your sponsor child.
That's good. Yeah. So support. No, what was the first one?
Sponsor.
Should
remember
support.
That. Scribe.
And C. My next one is C. C, here is a picture of one of my colleagues, one of the pastors that were on the trip, and he got to meet his Compassion child. Now, she's a little bit older and was quite shy, but it was just an incredible privilege to be a part of that. It's also like the closest that I have got to doing one of the things that I would love to do one day, and it was just a beautiful privilege to be a part of it. It's been hard, obviously, to do this part of our encouragement over the last 2.5 years, but guess what? We're slowly getting to a space where we're going to be able to travel more, which is fantastic. And one of the reasons why we chose Zumba in Indonesia is because, well, there's two reasons. It's very accessible from Perth, and it's our hope that into the future that we're going to be able to take teams of people to get up there and to love on and be exposed to the work of Compassion and to meet your children. And the other reason is one of our Beyond family members, Pakandi. Pakandi works and does ministry in that area as well, which is great. Just that fantastic being able to do two things in once in that place. So can I encourage you to get excited about going again? We're going to be able to do this soon, and we're going to be able to go see the fantastic work of Compassion, but also get to meet our children. So put it on your bucket list and get ready for what God's going to do, because it is a life-changing, life-reshaping trip, and I encourage everybody to go do it.
Very excited for that.
Yeah. And then we got one last thing. It's not an S.
No, it's not, but it's pretty important.
It's very important. What we're going to do as we wrap up, so the 4 S's, what were they? Sponsor, support, scribe, C. Go C. We're going to take up a love offering this morning. I think that's pretty important. As I prepared for today, I came across this appeal on the Compassion website, and I sensed that God would have us play just a small part in this. God says in Zechariah 10 verse 6, "I will restore them because I have compassion on them. So I'd love for us to take up a love offering and put it towards this appeal, the Restore a Generation appeal. Now, just a couple of things as you consider and contemplate what you might give this morning. Education is critical to breaking the generational cycle of poverty. We've talked about that this morning. It's so true. Yet 258 million children around the world are currently out of school, and 463 million could not access remote learning programs during the pandemic. Also, schools were closed 3 times longer in the developing world, and it certainly impacted my girls because they, in their letters, mentioned that to us, that they have been missing going to school and haven't liked the disruptions of the pandemic in their letters. So can we, church, can we give today? Can we give to help restore a generation through education? Luke 12 wouldn't be a Compassion Sunday without hearing Luke 12 verse 48, where it says, to whom much is given, much is what? It's required. It's talking to us. So what I'm going to do is I've asked Tam and Matthias to just help us prepare our hearts this morning. Then I'm going to come up and pray, and then we're going to stand and we're going to sing Hosanna together, break my heart for what breaks yours. And during that time, we're going to pass around some buckets. Now, this is the first time in 2.5 years that we've passed a bucket around. And for some of you, that might freak the heck out of you. So, I don't know, there's all sorts of techniques you could use. You could go the whole, pick it up like that, touch another place that someone else hasn't touched. But we thought it was so important that we pass the buckets around this morning, because I think we miss people if we say, hey, go and give it to the foyer. So we're going to take up this offering. If you don't feel comfortable, just sort of do the whole, balk. But please, let's give generously. The other thing we can do is on our push pay, on our mobile phones. If you haven't come with cash, on our mobile phones we have a push pay app. If you hit the drop downs, you will see Compassion Love Offering. Hit that one and then give to your heart's content through your phone. And then the other thing to do, if you're not prepared right now, that you can go straight to the Compassion. Can we pass them out a little bit later, Dave? You're ahead of your time here, brother. So we're going to give during the singing of the song. You can go straight to the website from Compassion, and if you give directly to them, you can get yourself a tax deduction. So let's prepare our hearts. Thank you, Tam and Matthias, and then I'm going to come back and pray, and then we'll take up the offering, David.